All right, picture this. 8 guys who literally built their careers from the ground up, survived a brutal survival show, lost members along the way, got told they weren't good enough, and still came out swinging to become one of the biggest groups on the planet. That's Stray Kids. But here's the thing most people don't talk about. Behind the stadium tours, the Billboard records, and the fire performances, these guys carry scars, deep ones. And sometimes the only person they could truly talk to was themselves. What happens when an idol sits down with nothing but a pen and raw honesty? What does a 17-year-old who left everything behind say to his future self? What does a leader write when the weight of 7 other dreams sits on his shoulders and nobody's watching? What confession comes out when the cameras are off and the only audience is a blank page? Tonight, we're counting down 5 letters that Stray Kids members wrote to themselves. And trust me, by the time we hit number 1, you're gonna need tissues. This isn't fan fiction. This is real. These are their actual words. Let's get into it.
Number 5. Seungmin, the letter nobody expected from the strongest one. You know what's funny about Stray Kids? Every single member has this public image, this persona that fans latch onto, and for Kim Seungmin, that image has always been the steady one, the reliable one, the member who doesn't cry easily, the guy who roasts his hyungs without blinking, who practices his vocals at 2 a.m. without complaining, who shows up every single day like clockwork and just delivers. Stay often call him the pillar of the group because while everyone else is being chaotic and emotional and wild, and listen, we love that chaos, Seungmin is just there, calm, collected, almost unshakable. But here's what people forget. The ones who look the strongest? They're usually the ones fighting the hardest battles in silence. And when Seungmin finally sat down and wrote a letter to himself, what came out of that pen wasn't calm. It wasn't collected. It was a flood. Let me take you back a bit because you need context to understand why this letter hit so different. Kim Seungmin didn't grow up in the trainee system like some idols who've been in entertainment companies since they were 10 or 11. He auditioned for JYP Entertainment through an open audition, and when I say open audition, I mean he was one of thousands. Literally thousands of kids showed up that day dreaming of becoming an idol, and Seungmin walked in with nothing but his voice and a ridiculous amount of determination. He didn't have years of dance training. He didn't have connections in the industry. He didn't have a backup plan. He just had this gut feeling that he was supposed to be there, and somehow, against every statistical probability, he made it through. But making it through the audition was just the beginning of the war. When the survival show Stray Kids aired in 2017, Seungmin was thrown into an environment where every other trainee seemed to have something louder, something flashier, something more immediately impressive. You had Changbin with his insane rap skills. You had Hyunjin with visuals that could stop traffic. You had Han who could literally do everything: rap, sing, produce, perform. And then there was Seungmin, whose greatest weapon was his vocal tone. Pure, clean, emotional, but not the kind of thing that makes you jump out of your seat in the first 3 seconds. It's the kind of talent that grows on you, that wraps around you slowly, that you don't fully appreciate until you realize you can't imagine the song without it. And during that survival show period, Seungmin knew this. He knew he wasn't the one getting the loudest reactions. He knew the editing wasn't always in his favor. He knew that in a group full of self-producing members who wrote their own lyrics and composed their own beats, his role as the vocalist sometimes felt smaller. Not because it was vocals are the backbone of literally every song, but because the K-pop industry has this obsession with idols who do it all, and Seungmin was painfully aware that the public narrative didn't always spotlight what he brought to the table. Fast forward to the moment that matters. It was during one of those special anniversary fan content segments, the kind where the members sit down, reflect on their journey, and write messages. Sometimes these are addressed to Stay, sometimes to each other, sometimes to their families. But this time, the prompt was different. Write a letter to yourself. And Seungmin, the guy who never cries, the guy who always keeps it together, picked up that pen and started writing to the version of himself that almost gave up. He addressed his younger self, the trainee who used to stay behind in the practice room after everyone left, replaying the same choreography over and over because he knew his dancing wasn't at the same level as the others. The kid who would record himself singing and listen back with this critical, almost cruel ear, picking apart every note that wasn't perfect. He wrote about the nights where he genuinely questioned whether he deserved his spot in the group. Not in a dramatic, attention-seeking way, that's not Seungmin's style. In a quiet, internal, deeply honest way. The kind of doubt that doesn't scream, it whispers. It sits in the back of your mind at 3 a.m. when the practice room is empty and you're staring at your own reflection in the mirror and thinking, am I enough? And what made this letter absolutely devastating was one specific line where he essentially told his past self, you were so busy comparing yourself to everyone else that you forgot to see what only you could do. Let that sink in for a second. Here's a member of one of the most successful fourth-generation K-pop groups in history, a group that has sold millions of albums, performed in stadiums across the world, topped charts that most artists can only dream of. And he's writing to his younger self about feeling invisible. About feeling like his contributions didn't matter as much. About the specific, gut-wrenching loneliness of being surrounded by incredibly talented people and wondering if you're the weak link. But the letter didn't stay in that dark place. That's what makes Seungmin who he is. He pivoted. He wrote about the moment he realized that his voice, that clean, pure, emotional tone, was the thing that gave Stray Kids songs their heart. Not the hard-hitting rap verses, not the intense choreography, not the dramatic visual moments. The heart. The part that makes you feel something in your chest when you listen. He wrote about understanding that being the steady one wasn't a weakness, it was his superpower. That every group needs someone who holds it together so that everyone else has the freedom to fall apart when they need to. He was the anchor. And anchors don't get the glory. Anchors don't get the spotlight. But without the anchor, the whole ship drifts. When he read parts of this letter, the other members were visibly shaken. Bang Chan, the leader who rarely gets caught off guard, was staring at Seungmin with this expression that said everything. He had no idea Seungmin had been carrying this. Because that's the thing about the quiet ones, about the strong ones. They carry their weight so gracefully that you forget they're carrying anything at all. And here's what really broke Stay's hearts about this whole thing. Seungmin ended the letter by thanking himself. Not thanking the fans, not thanking the members, not thanking the company. Thanking himself. For not quitting. For showing up on the days when he didn't want to. For choosing to stay, pun absolutely intended, when every insecurity in his body was telling him to walk away. He thanked the version of himself that was scared and uncertain and full of doubt, but showed up anyway. And honestly, that might be the most powerful thing you can do. Not writing a letter to the version of you that succeeded, but writing a letter to the version of you that almost didn't. The version that was one bad day away from giving up. Looking at that version of yourself and saying, thank you for holding on. Because look where we are now. That's Seungmin. That's number 5. And if this one already got you emotional, I'm telling you right now, you are not ready for what's coming next. Number 4. I.N. The boy who grew up before he was ready. Alright, let me ask you something before we dive into this one. Do you remember what you were doing when you were 16? Seriously, think about it. Most of us were stressing about homework, figuring out friendships, maybe dealing with our first crush, trying to convince our parents to let us stay out past 10. Normal stuff. Teenage stuff. Now imagine being 16 and standing on a stage in front of cameras, judges, and millions of viewers, knowing that one wrong move, one bad performance, one moment of weakness could end everything before it even started. That was Yang Jeonjin's reality. That was N. The magne of Stray Kids, the youngest member, the baby of the group, and the one who had to grow up faster than any teenager should ever have to. When I.N wrote a letter to himself, it wasn't just emotional. It was a reckoning. A full, honest, heartbreaking conversation between the man he's become and the child he barely got to be. And if you think being the youngest in a world-famous K-pop group is all fun and games and getting babied by your hyungs, this letter will shatter that illusion into a million pieces. Let's set the stage properly because Jeonjin's story has layers that most casual fans don't even know about. Young Jeonjin was born on February 8, 2001, in Busan, South Korea. He auditioned for JYP Entertainment and made it in as a trainee, which already puts him in a tiny, elite percentage of kids who even get through the door. But here's where it gets intense. When the survival show Stray Kids was being filmed in 2017, Jeonjin was the youngest trainee in the group. He was surrounded by members who had been training longer, who had more developed skills, who had already found their artistic identity. Changbin had been rapping for years. Han was already producing tracks. Bangchan had been a trainee at JYP for 7 years by that point, 7 years. And Jeonjin? Jeonjin was still figuring out who he was. Not just as an artist, but as a person. Because that's the thing about being 16, you're not finished yet. You're not supposed to be finished. You're supposed to be messy and uncertain and exploring and making mistakes in private, not under studio lights with the entire internet watching. And during the survival show, something happened that would scar Jeonjin in ways that didn't fully surface until years later. He was eliminated. Let me say that again so it hits properly. The Magne of Stray Kids, the member that fans now cannot imagine the group without, was eliminated during the survival show. He was told he wasn't ready. He was told his skills weren't at the level they needed to be. And for a 16-year-old kid who had poured everything he had into this dream, who had left his family in Busan and moved to Seoul alone to train, who had sacrificed his entire normal teenage life for this one shot, being told you're not enough wasn't just a professional setback. It was a personal devastation. He was eventually brought back into the group, and Stray Kids debuted as 8 members. But that elimination? That moment of being told you don't make the cut? That doesn't just go away because you got a second chance. It lives in you. It becomes this voice in the back of your head that whispers every time you mess up a choreography, every time your voice cracks during a high note, every time you see a comment online saying you're the least talented member. And Jeonjin heard that voice for years. So when the time came to write a letter to himself, everything poured out. Jeonjin wrote to his younger self, the kid from Busan with the bright smile and the braces who showed up at JYP with nothing but raw potential and a heart full of dreams. And the first thing he addressed was the guilt. Not guilt about something he did wrong, but guilt about the childhood he lost. He wrote about missing school events, missing his friends' birthdays, missing family dinners and holidays and those small, ordinary moments that most people take for granted, but that become precious when they're gone. He wrote about the specific feeling of scrolling through his old classmates' social media posts and seeing them living normal teenage lives, going to amusement parks, studying for college entrance exams together, hanging out at convenience stores after school doing absolutely nothing and feeling this strange, complicated mix of envy and sadness. Not because he regretted his choice, but because he realized that you can't have both. You can't be a trainee at one of the biggest entertainment companies in Korea and also be a normal teenager. The two realities don't coexist. You have to pick one. And he picked this. At 16. Before he even fully understood what he was giving up. What made this letter absolutely gut-wrenching was when Jeonjin wrote about the pressure of being the magne. In Korean culture, the youngest member of a group holds a specific position. You're supposed to be cute, lovable, the one everyone protects. And Jeonjin played that role beautifully for the cameras. He smiled. He did Egyo. He let his hyungs ruffle his hair and pinch his cheeks and baby him on variety shows. But behind that role was a young man who was desperately trying to be taken seriously as an artist. Who was staying up late practicing his vocals because he knew that public perception of him was the cute one and not the talented one. Who was watching his hyungs produce tracks and write lyrics and contribute creatively to the group's music and feeling like he was falling behind. Not because he lacked talent, but because he lacked time. They had years of head start. He was trying to catch up while simultaneously going through puberty, dealing with the emotional roller coaster of adolescence, and performing in front of tens of thousands of people. There's a line in his letter that absolutely destroyed Stay when it came out. He wrote something along the lines of, "I don't know when I stopped being a kid. I just looked up one day and realized it had already happened." Read that again. I don't know when I stopped being a kid. That's not dramatic. That's not poetic exaggeration. That's the lived reality of a child who entered the entertainment industry before he was old enough to vote. The transition from boy to man didn't happen in stages for Jeonjin. It didn't happen gradually, with milestones and celebrations and coming-of-age moments. It happened in the gaps between schedules. It happened in practice rooms and airport terminals and hotel rooms in foreign countries. It happened while the world was watching, but nobody was really seeing. He grew up on camera and millions of people witnessed it, but the actual growing up, the internal stuff, the hard stuff, the lonely stuff, happened in private. In silence. In letters to himself that nobody was supposed to read. But here's where Jeonjin's letter takes a turn that separates it from just being sad. Because Jeonjin didn't write this letter to mourn his lost childhood. He wrote it to make peace with it. He told his younger self that the sacrifice was worth it. Not in a toxic, grind culture way. Not in a you should be grateful way. In a genuine, honest, deeply mature way that you wouldn't expect from someone his age. He wrote about the family he found in Stray Kids, 7 Hyungs who didn't just treat him like the baby of the group, but who genuinely raised him. Who taught him how to navigate the industry. Who held him when he cried after bad performances. Who celebrated his small victories like they were their own. He wrote about Bang Chan staying up with him to practice vocals. About Lee No quietly correcting his dance moves without ever making him feel embarrassed. About Changbin and Han including him in studio sessions even when he didn't think he had anything to contribute, just so he could learn by being in the room. He wrote about Stay, the fans who watched him grow up and who grew up with him. Who sent him letters on his birthday telling him they were proud of him. Who defended him online when antis called him the weak link. Who saw him not as the magne who needed to be protected, but as an artist who was blooming in his own time, at his own pace. And at the end of the letter, Jeonjin wrote something to his younger self that was so simple it almost doesn't seem like it should be devastating. But it is. He said, "You're going to be okay. Not because everything gets easier, but because you get stronger." That's N. The boy who became a man in the spotlight and somehow kept his heart intact through all of it. The magne who carried the weight of lost childhood on his shoulders and turned it into something beautiful. That's number 4. And I know what you're thinking, if this is only number 4, what could possibly be more emotional? Oh, trust me. We're just getting started. The next one? The next one involves a member who almost didn't make it. And I'm not talking about almost not making it into the group. I'm talking about almost not making it at all. Stay right here. Number 3. Felix. The letter written in 2 languages because one wasn't enough. Okay, before I get into this one, I need you to understand something. There's a specific kind of loneliness that most people will never experience. It's not the loneliness of being alone in a room. It's not the loneliness of not having friends. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who care about you, people who want to connect with you, and not being able to communicate with them. Not because you don't want to, but because the words literally won't come out. Because the language in your head isn't the language in the room. Because every thought you have, every feeling you want to express, every joke you want to make, every cry for help you want to scream, all of it gets stuck in translation. That is the loneliness that Felix lived in for months. And when he finally sat down to write a letter to himself, he did something that no other Stray Kids member did. He wrote it in 2 languages, English and Korean. Because one language couldn't hold everything he needed to say. And that detail alone, that single, small detail, tells you everything about who Felix is and what he went through. Let me take you all the way back. Felix was born Lee Yobok on September 15, 2000, in Sydney, Australia. He grew up in a Korean-Australian household, but his dominant language was English. His Korean? Basic at best. Conversational enough to talk to his grandparents, maybe order food at a Korean restaurant, but nowhere near fluent enough to survive in a professional environment in Seoul, South Korea. And yet, in 2017, this kid, this freckle-faced, sunshine-smiling kid from Sydney packed his bags, said goodbye to his family, left behind everything familiar, and flew to the other side of the world to audition for JYP Entertainment. He was 17. 17 years old, walking into one of the most competitive entertainment companies on the planet, in a country where he could barely string together a full sentence. Think about the audacity of that. Think about the courage, or maybe the beautiful, naive recklessness it takes to do something like that. But Felix didn't just audition. He made it in. He became a trainee. And that's when the real nightmare began. Because being a JYP trainee isn't like going to school where you can take your time and learn at your own pace. It's intense. It's daily vocal lessons, dance practices that run for 6, 7, 8 hours, evaluations where your entire future gets decided in a 3-minute performance. And all of it, every instruction, every critique, every conversation with coaches and fellow trainees, was in Korean. Felix has talked about this period in various interviews and behind-the-scenes content, and every time he does, you can see it in his eyes. The memory still hurts. He's described sitting in rooms during group meetings and understanding maybe 30% of what was being said. He's talked about nodding along and pretending he understood because he was too embarrassed to ask people to repeat themselves for the 5th time. He's talked about the specific humiliation of trying to express a complex emotion, frustration, fear, homesickness, and only having the vocabulary of a toddler to do it with. Imagine wanting to say, I'm scared that I'm not good enough, and I miss my family, and I don't know if I made the right decision, and only being able to say, I'm sad. I miss home. The gap between what he felt and what he could say was an ocean. And he was drowning in it. During the survival show, Felix worked unbelievably hard. His dance skills were already impressive. The kid could move in ways that made professional choreographers do a double take. His deep voice, this impossibly low, resonant bass that comes out of a face that looks like it belongs to a fairy, became one of the most distinctive vocal colors in K-pop. But his Korean was still lagging. And in a survival show environment where communication, teamwork, and the ability to contribute to group discussions and creative processes is essential, the language barrier wasn't just a personal struggle. It became a professional liability. And then it happened. The moment that still makes Stay cry years later. Felix was eliminated from the group. JYP himself, Park Jin-young, the founder of the company, the man who built the careers of countless K-pop legends, looked at Felix and essentially said, "Not yet. You're not ready." And the footage of that moment is something you never forget once you've seen it. Felix standing there, trying to hold it together, his whole world collapsing in real time. And the other members, Bang Chan especially, the only other member who spoke English, the one person in that entire building who could truly understand what Felix was going through, absolutely breaking down. Chan was sobbing. Not quiet tears. Gut-wrenching, body-shaking sobs. Because Chan knew something that the cameras couldn't fully capture. He knew how hard Felix had been trying. He knew about the nights Felix spent with a Korean textbook in one hand and his phone in the other, texting his mom in Sydney at 3 a.m. because the time zones meant that was the only window where they could talk. He knew about Felix memorizing Korean rap lyrics phonetically because he couldn't actually read them fast enough. He knew about the silent crying in the bathroom because Felix didn't want anyone to see him break. Chan knew all of it. And watching Felix get eliminated was like watching his little brother get told he wasn't enough. Felix was eventually brought back. The members fought for him. Stay fought for him. And Stray Kids debuted as 8, with Felix standing right where he belonged. But the scar of that elimination never fully healed. And the letter he wrote to himself years later is proof of that. Felix's letter is unlike any other letter a Stray Kids member has written because of its structure. He starts in English, his comfort language, his mother tongue, the language of his childhood in Sydney, the language he thinks in when he's alone. And he writes to the version of himself that got on that plane in Australia. The scared kid who didn't know what was waiting for him. He tells that kid, "You're going to feel more alone than you've ever felt in your life. And it's going to last longer than you think you can handle." He writes about specific moments, the first week in the JYP dorms when he couldn't understand what his roommates were talking about and just lay in bed pretending to be asleep. The time he called his mom crying and she cried too, and they just sat on the phone in silence across the ocean because there was nothing either of them could say to make it better. The time a coach gave him detailed feedback on his performance in Korean, and he nodded and smiled and said thank you, and then went to the bathroom and Googled every word he didn't understand, and there were a lot of words he didn't understand. And then, midway through the letter, something shifts. Felix switches to Korean. And this is where it gets devastating because you can feel the effort in every sentence. The Korean isn't as fluid as the English. It's simpler, more direct. But it's real. And he writes in Korean because he's now addressing the version of himself that exists in Korea. The version that learned. The version that fought through the language barrier word by word, sentence by sentence, until Korean stopped being a foreign language and started being a second home. He writes about the first time he made the members laugh with a Korean joke, not a scripted one, not a rehearsed one, but a spontaneous, natural, in-the-moment joke that came out of him in Korean without him even thinking about it. And he describes that moment as the first time he felt like he truly belonged. Not as the Australian member. Not as the English-speaking member. Not as the member who needed subtitles. Just as Felix. Just as one of 8. He writes about learning to express love in Korean, telling the members, and meaning it not just as translated English, but as Korean emotions, felt in Korean, expressed in Korean. About the first time he dreamed in Korean and woke up and realized that somewhere along the way, this country that had felt so foreign had become home. And then at the end, he merges both languages. English and Korean woven together in the same sentences, the same way they're woven together in his brain now, in his identity now. He tells himself, you are not half of anything. You are not half Australian and half Korean. You are fully both. And that's not a weakness. That's your power. Felix's letter isn't just a letter. It's a map of a journey. From isolation to belonging. From silence to voice. From a scared kid in an airport to a man who stands on stages in Tokyo, New York, London, Sao Paulo, and speaks to millions in both languages. And the fact that he wrote it in 2 languages? That's not a gimmick. That's the most honest thing he could have done. Because Felix's story doesn't exist in just one language. It never did. That's number 3. And if you're already emotional, I genuinely need you to brace yourself. Because number 2? Number 2 is about a leader. A leader who's been carrying everyone else's pain on his back since he was 13 years old. And his letter? His letter is the one he almost never showed anyone. Stay. Right. Here. Number 2. Bang Chan. The leader who wrote to the 13-year-old boy he left behind. Let me paint a picture for you, and I want you to really sit with this one. It's 2010. A 13-year-old kid in Sydney, Australia, a kid who plays sports, goes to school, has friends, has a normal life, tells his parents he wants to move to South Korea. Alone. Not for a vacation. Not for a semester abroad. To become a Kpop trainee at JYP Entertainment. He's 13. He barely speaks Korean. He's never lived away from his family. He has no guarantee that this will lead anywhere, no contract, no debut date, no promise. Just an opportunity to train, to practice, to maybe, possibly, if everything goes right and the stars align and 100 things fall into place, debut as an idol someday. And his parents say yes. They let him go. And that 13-year-old boy, Christopher Bang, who would later become Bang Chan, the leader of Stray Kids, got on a plane and flew into a future that would take 7 years to arrive. 7 years. Do you understand what 7 years means when you're 13? It means you walk into that company as a child and you don't come out the other side until you're 20. It means you spend your entire adolescence, every birthday, every holiday, every milestone that's supposed to define your teenage years, inside practice rooms and recording studios in a country that isn't yours, speaking a language that doesn't come naturally, surrounded by people who are all fighting for the same limited number of spots. And every single year, you watch other trainees debut. You watch GOT7 form and debut in 2014. You watch Twice form and debut in 2015. You watch Day 6 come together. You see people who arrived after you get their moment before you. And every time it happens, this voice in your head gets louder. What about me? When is it my turn? Is it ever going to be my turn? That was Bang Chan's reality for 7 years. And when he finally wrote a letter to himself, it wasn't addressed to Bang Chan, the leader. It wasn't addressed to the producer, the idol, the guy who runs the studio sessions and leads the concerts and does late-night V-Lives for fans around the world. It was addressed to Christopher, the boy from Sydney, the kid who got on the plane. And that distinction, that choice to write to Christopher, not Chan, tells you everything about how deep this letter goes. Chan's letter starts in a place that most fans don't expect. Guilt. Not sadness. Not nostalgia. Guilt. Specifically, guilt about his family. Because here's the part of the Bang Chan story that doesn't get talked about enough. When Chan left Australia at 13, he didn't just leave behind a city or a school or a group of friends. He left behind a family. Parents who loved him. A younger brother and a younger sister who were just kids themselves, who didn't fully understand why their big brother was leaving, who just knew that one day he was there and the next day he wasn't. And as the years went on, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, 5, 6, 7, Chan missed everything. He missed his brother's first day of high school. He missed his sister learning to ride a bike without training wheels. He missed family Christmases and Sunday dinners, and those random Tuesday evenings where nothing special happens, but everyone's together, and that's what makes it special. He missed his parents aging. He missed the small, irreplaceable moments that you don't realize are precious until you can't get them back. And the guilt he wrote about in his letter isn't the guilt of someone who made a bad choice. It's the guilt of someone who made the right choice and still lost something because of it. He wrote to his younger self about a specific phone call, one that he's never talked about in detail publicly but referenced in his letter. A call with his mom, late at night in Korea, which meant it was sometime during the day in Sydney. And his mom was telling him about something his siblings did, something ordinary, something small, and Chan realized he didn't recognize the way she described them. His brother's voice had gotten deeper. His sister had started a new hobby he didn't know about. They were growing up. And he was missing it. And he couldn't get those years back. No amount of success, no number of albums sold, no stadium tour, no Billboard record would give him back those Tuesday evenings. He wrote about the trainee years with a level of honesty that is rare for any idol, let alone the leader of a major group. He described the specific cycle of hope and disappointment that defined his time at JYP. Every few months, there would be rumors of a new boy group forming. Trainees would get pulled into meetings. Evaluations would intensify. And every single time, Chan would think, this is it. This is my moment. And every single time, it wasn't. For 7 years, he rode that roller coaster. Hope, disappointment, hope, disappointment. Over and over and over until the hope itself started to feel like a cruelty, because every time it built up, the fall was harder. He wrote about a specific night, and this is the part that absolutely shattered Stay, where he sat in the practice room after everyone else had gone home and genuinely considered quitting. Not in a passing, fleeting thought kind of way. In a serious, calculated, I'm going to call my parents tomorrow and tell them I'm coming home kind of way. He was exhausted. Not physically, although he was that too, but spiritually. The kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. The kind where you've been running towards something for so long that you can't remember why you started running in the first place. And he sat there, in that empty practice room, and he cried. Not for the cameras. Not for content. Alone. In silence. The way leaders cry, when no one is watching, when the weight is too heavy, but you can't put it down because 7 other people are counting on you to carry it. Because that's the other layer of Chan's story that makes his letter so devastating. When Stray Kids was finally formed, Chan wasn't just a member. He was the leader. The one who picked the members. JYP essentially gave him the responsibility of assembling the group, and Chan chose 7 people, 7 humans with their own dreams and fears and families and futures, and took their destinies into his hands. And from that moment on, every decision he made wasn't just about him anymore. Every late night in the studio wasn't just about his music. Every performance, every album, every era, he carried the weight of 8 careers on his shoulders. And in his letter, he wrote about what that weight actually feels like. It feels like never being able to have a bad day. It feels like being the first one to arrive and the last one to leave. It feels like staying up until 4 a.m. producing a track, and then waking up at 7 a.m. to make sure everyone else is okay. It feels like hiding your own anxiety so that the other members don't worry. It feels like being the person everyone leans on while having no one to lean on yourself, not because people don't care, but because you've trained yourself to never ask for help. You've convinced yourself that needing support is the same as being weak, and a leader can't be weak. He wrote to 13-year-old Christopher and said something that Stay have tattooed, framed, screenshotted, and cried over more times than anyone can count. He said, "I'm sorry it took so long. But I promise you, little bro, it was worth the wait." Little bro. He called his younger self little bro. In English. In that casual Australian, big brother tone that he uses when he's not being Bang Chan the idol, but just Chris from Sydney. And that switch from the formal, reflective tone of the rest of the letter to this sudden, warm, almost playful little bro is what broke people. Because it revealed something profound. Despite everything, despite the 7 years of waiting, despite the loneliness, despite the guilt, despite the crushing weight of leadership, the boy from Sydney is still in there. Christopher never left. He grew up. He became someone extraordinary. But he's still that kid who loved music and believed in something bigger than himself and got on a plane with nothing but a dream. Chan ended his letter with a line that I think about constantly. He wrote, "You carried everyone, but you forgot to carry yourself. So let me carry you now." The leader writing to the child. The man writing to the boy. The present self reaching back through time and finally giving that scared, lonely, exhausted 13-year-old the hug he never got. That's Bang Chan. That's number 2. And I know you think nothing could top this. I know you think we've already hit the emotional ceiling. But number one is the letter that Stray Kids themselves said was the hardest to hear. The one that made the entire room go silent. The one that deals with something so personal, so raw, so real, that it changed the way Stay understood everything about this member. You're not ready. But let's go. Number 1. Han. The letter that made the whole room go silent. We're here. Number 1. And I'm going to be honest with you, I debated whether to put this one at the top. Not because it isn't the most emotional. It clearly is. But because talking about what Han Jisung wrote in his letter means talking about something that K-pop, as an industry, has spent decades pretending doesn't exist. Mental health. Real, clinical, life-altering mental health struggles. Not, I felt a little sad today. Not, the schedule was tiring. The kind of mental health battle where your own brain becomes a prison and every day you wake up is a negotiation between the version of you that wants to keep going and the version of you that physically, chemically, neurologically cannot. That's what Han wrote about. And when he read it, when the words left his mouth and filled the room, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The members didn't react with dramatic gasps or theatrical tears. They just sat there. In silence. Because sometimes, when something is that real, silence is the only appropriate response. Let me tell you about Han Jisung, and I mean really tell you, not the surface level stuff. Han was born on September 14, 2000. He lived in Malaysia for a period of his childhood before moving back to Korea, which already gives him a background of displacement and adaptation that mirrors Felix's story, but in a different key. He joined JYP Entertainment as a trainee and quickly became one of the most undeniably talented people in the building. And I don't say that as hyperbole. Han Jisung is what the industry calls a triple threat, but even that term feels insufficient. He raps with a speed, precision, and emotional intensity that puts him in the conversation with the best rappers in all of K-pop, not just fourth generation, all of K-pop. He sings with a vocal color that is instantly recognizable, slightly nasal, deeply emotional, versatile enough to shift from soft ballad tones to aggressive, raw power in the same song. And he produces. As 1/3 of 3 Racha, Stray Kids in-house production unit alongside Bang Chan and Seungmin, Han has co-written and co-produced the majority of Stray Kids' discography. We're talking hundreds of songs. Hundreds. He's not a performer who also dabbles in songwriting. He's a songwriter and producer who also happens to be one of the best performers on any stage in the world. And all of this talent, all of this output, all of this brilliance exists inside a person who has been fighting a war with anxiety that most people can't even imagine. Han has been open about his anxiety in ways that are almost unprecedented for a male K-pop idol. In an industry where showing vulnerability is often seen as weakness, where male idols are expected to be strong, confident, unbothered, and unbreakable, Han stood up and said, "I am not okay. And I need you to know that." He's talked about panic attacks. Real ones. The kind where your heart races so fast you think you're dying. The kind where your vision narrows and your hands go numb and your chest tightens and your brain floods with so much adrenaline that you can't distinguish between a real threat and your own nervous system misfiring. The kind that don't care if you're backstage about to perform in front of 50,000 people. The kind that don't care about your schedule, your responsibilities, your fans, your members, your career. They just come. Without warning. Without logic. Without mercy. In 2022, Han took a temporary hiatus from some of Stray Kids' activities due to what was officially described as psychological anxiety. And while the company's statement was clinical and brief, Stay understood what it meant. It meant that the war Han had been fighting behind the scenes had escalated to the point where he couldn't fight and perform at the same time anymore. It meant that the guy who always seemed like the most energetic, the most playful, the most chaotic member of the group, the one who made everyone laugh, the one who lit up every room, the one who seemed like he was fueled by pure, uncontainable joy, was breaking apart behind the curtain. And this is something people need to understand about anxiety and depression. They don't always look the way you expect them to. The saddest people in the room are often the funniest. The people fighting the hardest battles are often the ones with the biggest smiles. Because making other people laugh is a way of controlling the narrative. If everyone thinks you're the happy one, nobody asks if you're okay. And if nobody asks, you never have to find the words to explain something that words can't really capture. Han's letter to himself is the most devastating thing any Stray Kids member has ever written, and I say that with full awareness of how heavy the previous 4 entries on this list have been. He wrote to the version of himself that was in the deepest pit. Not the version that was recovering. Not the version that was learning to cope. The version that was in it. The version that would wake up in the morning and feel his chest tighten before he even opened his eyes. The version that would sit in the studio trying to write lyrics and stare at a blank screen for hours because the anxiety had locked every creative door in his brain and thrown away the key. The version that would stand backstage before a performance, smiling for the staff, hyping up the members, doing his vocal warm-ups, acting like everything was fine, and then step into a bathroom stall and press his palms against the wall and try to remember how to breathe. He wrote about the specific loneliness of anxiety. And this is something that people who haven't experienced clinical anxiety might not fully understand, so let me try to translate what Han described. Anxiety isn't sadness. Sadness has a shape. Sadness makes sense. Something bad happened, you feel bad about it. Eventually you process it and the sadness fades. Anxiety doesn't work like that. Anxiety is fear without a source. It's your brain screaming danger when there is no danger. It's your body preparing to fight or flee when there's nothing to fight and nowhere to flee to. And the cruelest part, the part that Han wrote about with a raw honesty that left the room in dead silence, is that you know it's irrational. You know, logically, intellectually, that there's no reason to feel this way. You know you're successful. You know you're loved. You know you're talented. You know all the facts. But anxiety doesn't care about facts. Anxiety is not a logic problem. It's a chemistry problem. It's a wiring problem. And no amount of success or love or fan support can rewire your brain. He wrote one single line, that hit so hard that Stay have never been able to talk about it without getting emotional. He wrote to himself, "You smile so much that even you forgot you were hurting." Read that again. Slowly. You smile so much that even you forgot you were hurting. That's not poetry. That's not a lyric crafted for maximum emotional impact. That's a man telling the truth about the mask he wore every single day. The smile that became so practiced, so automatic, so convincing that it fooled everyone. It fooled the fans. It fooled the staff. It fooled the cameras. And eventually, it almost fooled him. Almost. Because the panic attacks didn't forget. The sleepless nights didn't forget. The tightness in his chest that never fully went away didn't forget. The body keeps score even when the smile keeps lying. But here's what makes Han's letter number 1. It's not the darkness. It's what he did with the darkness. Because Han didn't just write about his pain. He wrote about his decision. The decision to get help. The decision to tell someone. The decision to break the silence that the K-pop industry and Korean society more broadly has enforced around mental health for generations. He wrote about the first time he told Bang Chan really told him. Not a vague, I'm not feeling great, but a full, terrifying, vulnerable confession. Hyung, something is wrong with me and I don't know how to fix it. And he described Chan's response, which was simply to sit with him. Not to offer solutions. Not to say you'll be fine, or just think positive, or any of the well-meaning, but useless things people say when they don't understand what you're going through. Chan just sat next to him. In silence. And let him not be okay. He wrote about the decision to take the hiatus in 2022, and how it felt like both the bravest and the most terrifying thing he'd ever done. Braver than any performance. More terrifying than any stage. Because stepping away meant admitting publicly that he was struggling. It meant trusting Stay to understand. It meant trusting the world to not see him as weak. And Stay? Stay showed up in a way that still makes Han emotional when he talks about it. No blame. No frustration. No, when are you coming back? Just an ocean of support that said, take your time. We'll be here. We're not going anywhere. And at the end of the letter, Han wrote to himself something that transcends K-pop, transcends fandom, transcends entertainment entirely, and enters the territory of universal human truth. He said, asking for help wasn't giving up. It was the first time you actually fought back. Let that sink in. For years, Han thought he was fighting his anxiety by ignoring it, by performing through it, by smiling through it, by producing hit songs and delivering flawless rap verses and being the energy of the group while his brain was on fire. He thought endurance was strength. He thought silence. So there you have it. 5 letters. 5 members of Stray Kids. 5 completely different stories that somehow all lead to the same truth. Let's take one last look at what we just experienced. At number 5, we had Seungmin, the one everyone thought was unbreakable, the steady anchor of the group, who quietly wrote to the version of himself that felt invisible and wondered if his talent even mattered. He taught us that the ones who hold everyone else together are often the ones who need to be held the most. At number 4, we had I.N, the magne who grew up before he was ready, who lost his childhood to practice rooms and camera lights, who was eliminated and told he wasn't enough, and who wrote to the boy he barely got to be. He taught us that growing up isn't always a celebration. Sometimes it's a grief you process in silence. At number 3, we had Felix, the boy from Sydney who crossed an ocean and couldn't cross a language, who wrote his letter in 2 languages because his heart existed in both, who turned isolation into identity. He taught us that belonging isn't about where you're from. It's about who you become when you refuse to give up. At number 2, we had Bang Chan, the leader who left home at 13, waited 7 years for a dream that kept slipping away, and then carried 8 careers on his back without ever asking someone to carry him. He taught us that leadership isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being the one who stays when everyone else would leave. And at number 1, we had Han, the genius who smiled so hard he forgot he was hurting, who fought a war with his own mind while the world only saw the victories, and who discovered that the bravest thing you can do is admit you're not okay. He taught us that asking for help isn't a surrender, it's the first real act of fighting back. 5 letters. 5 different battles. But one common thread that runs through every single one: honesty. In an industry that thrives on perfection, on polished images, on carefully curated personas, these 5 members chose to be real. They chose to sit down with a pen and a blank page and tell the truth. Not for content. Not for views. Not for fan engagement. for themselves. Because sometimes the most important conversation you'll ever have isn't with your fans, your friends, your family, or your therapist. It's with yourself. And if Stray Kids have proven anything through these letters, it's this: the people who inspire millions are not the ones who pretend to be perfect. They're the ones who are brave enough to show you their cracks and trust you to still see them as whole. To every Stay watching this, they wrote those letters for themselves. But the courage it took to share them, that was for you. Remember that. And if you haven't yet, go write a letter to yourself. You might be surprised at what you need to hear. That's our list. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.